So, hi everyone, welcome to Tech Talks London. This is episode 50. After a long time at staying at home and doing this kind of lives, today we have John Graham-Cumming, Cloudflare CTO. It's a special episode. We usually don't do this in English. We did this once or twice before of this episode, but this is going to be the landmark for us because we're going to change a bit of the format also. But we have John today. Maybe you can introduce yourself to our audience and I don't know, just talk a bit about you, what you've been doing at Cloudflare. Obviously, I have your article here on Wikipedia, which is quite impressive, and we can discuss about that. But maybe you can give me a bit of view of yourself.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you've given the basic introduction, which is that I'm Cloudflare's CTO. I've been with Cloudflare for, it's going to be 9 years at the end of this year. So since it was a very, very small company, and I am currently responsible for all of the product development at Cloudflare, the operation of the service. So if you're a Cloudflare customer or you've been to a website that Cloudflare protects, that all falls under my area. The research team that does long-term research, and a small group of engineers who do kind of crazy projects, things like hacking the Linux kernel and things like that. So a very, very large part of the technology in Cloudflare sits under me. I'm based in Lisbon. Bom dia.
There you go. Yes. How's your Portuguese? Improving?
Yes, definitely. So I've been here. So Cloudflare opened an office here on July the 16th of last year. So we're coming up to a year now with 12 people. We have 36 people now. So we've tripled in size in under a year. And so I've been living here since the end of August. And so, I do kind of speak Portuguese, but I'm not going to embarrass myself here. It's getting better. I was very, very glad that I learned to speak French a long time ago because, another Latin language helps a lot with the grammar. But yes, Portuguese has its own grammar surprises. So it's definitely of the Latin languages one where it's like, wait, why is it in that order? So
yes, it's a bit, and for people that actually don't understand Portuguese, sometimes they get confused with kind of Russian because sometimes we speak too fast, especially around Lisbon. If you go to Porto, it's a different type of, but it's still Portuguese, but it's with a different accent. And if you go to the islands like Azores or Madeira, then it's completely different. Sometimes I even myself I can't understand them, which is kind of awkward.
My wife has a funny story about accents, which is that she is French and she speaks English very, very well. In fact, studied at college, but she and I met in the UK in a pub, and there were a group of other people. There was a guy from Scotland, a guy from the north of England, an Irish guy, and me. And she said, of all the people, you were the one I could understand the best, because obviously she had that kind of English pronunciation. And I've definitely experienced that in Portugal. I was just actually in the north last week. And I hope no one from Lisbon is watching, but some of the people from Porto were a lot easier to understand. And it's Yeah, because in Lisbon, what happens is everyone drops the end of every word. I feel like the people in Lisbon, they start a word going, and then they're like, oh, I'm fed up with that word. I'll do the next word now. So we all learn to say obrigado, obrigado. Nobody in Lisbon says obrigado. Everyone says obrigado. And they get like, forget about the end. And that applies to, so it's, as a new speaker, you have to be like, wait, no, what were they trying to say? So it's getting
that's good. One of the things you have on your Wikipedia article is that you started the petition because of the Alan Turing in the UK. Was that something that you're really proud of, as in, because it was a big movement that actually it came through, right? So
I guess I am proud of it. I'm surprised that it actually worked. So the history of that is that back in 2009, so we're talking 11 years ago now, I actually moved back to the UK, having been living abroad for a long time. And I saw someone, I think it was Stephen Fry, actually saying, oh, by the way, today would have been Alan Turing's birthday, but of course he died. And I knew the whole story because I did computer science. I was very interested in computer security. Turing touches on all these different areas. I was a mathematician as well. And as the story of Bletchley Park had come out, and we understood his contribution, you sort of say, wow, this is somebody we should really be celebrating, did all these amazing things. And of course, he committed suicide after having been chemically castrated with estrogen for being homosexual at a time when homosexuality was illegal in the UK, effectively. and actually got decriminalized not that long after his suicide. So I was like, this situation is just such a clear example of why laws like that hurt good people and hurt all people, because of he was somebody who contributed so much, and he died in his 40s, and I was about the same age as when he died. So it all kind of made me think, goodness, he was only my age, and I was early 40s. And so I just wrote a silly blog post saying Britain should apologize. I just got mad, right? I was like, Britain should apologize, blah blah. And somebody sent me an email, I think, and said, you could start a petition. And I didn't know this because I'd been away from the UK for a long time. I didn't understand that there were these online petitions on the Number 10 website of the government. And so I thought, I'll do that. So I think that day or the next day, I just wrote this, and I didn't even really give it much thought. I just wrote like, this is what should happen, blah blah. And I thought maybe 500 people are going to sign this, because who cares about this guy that mathematicians have heard of. Yeah, he was important, but he's dead a long time ago. And it just seemed like there was not going to be that many people to get excited enough. And only people in Britain could sign it, right? This was a proper petition. It wasn't, change.org where anybody can sign from all over the world. It was like you had to be in Britain. You had to really want this change to happen. And yeah, I want to say it took off a life of its own. It didn't actually. I mean, it took off a little bit. I got 500, I got 1,000 signatures, and then I was like, I should try and get press about it. And the press started writing about it. Famous people started signing it. It sort of grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And then it had grown a lot, and I'd done loads of press and all this kind of stuff. And then right before in London, there's a bank holiday at the end of August, where everyone gets a day off. And right before that, I emailed a journalist at the BBC who I'd met once, called Zoe Kleiman. She's still there. She's one of the big tech reporters there. And I sent her this really cheeky email that said, you should totally write a story about this. It's a really important story. I was basically telling her, you should do this. And she looked into it. She replied to me and she said, I'm going to write something. I have no idea if it's going to get published. I'm going away because it's the bank holiday weekend. Yeah. I'm submitting it to the editor. Who knows, right? So I didn't see the article. And then on the Monday morning, that is the bank holiday day, I woke up, grabbed my phone, hit refresh on the website, because you could see the number of signatures. Actually, you could see the signatories. Yes. And it had done, the graph had suddenly done this, right? It just gone vertical.
Amazing.
And that's because the BBC wrote about it, and Zoe's story had been published. And after that, it was not long after that the government actually issued this apology. And funny thing about that story is, talk about a pandemic, I had actually managed to get H1N1, the swine flu, and I was sick as a dog. In fact, I think I was sick as a dog because I took Tamiflu, which was, the cure.
Strongest one,
And I was so ill. And then, I get this email saying, can you call Number 10 today? And I thought it was a joke. I thought someone was, spoofing the email. So I Googled the phone number, and sure enough, the phone number was the phone number of Number 10 Downing Street. So I was like, all right, I'm going to call. And you imagine, I really feel sick. I'm in bed. So I call them. And this woman answers, and they put me through immediately. Like, oh, yeah, we know who you are, And they said, the apology goes out tonight. We've already got it in the newspaper. We just need you to okay it. And she read it to me, and then I said, yeah, it sounded great. And then I was thinking, imagine, I'm just like feverish and everything. And then she says, the Prime Minister wants to talk to you. I was like, okay. Now, Prime Minister was Gordon Brown. If people in Britain will remember Gordon Brown. It's not a very, chatty kind of fellow, quite a thinker. And, so what happened was, she said, Gordon will call you. And so I hang up, and I'm just sort of there. And I think I said to my wife, I think the Prime Minister's going to call me.
He's going to call me.
So, what are you talking about? And sure enough, my phone rings, and there was no ceremony. It wasn't like, I think in American movies, it's like, hold on for the president or something. He literally called me on my phone. He's like, hi, John, this is Gordon. And so, just imagine the conversation with me. First of all, a bit starstruck. H1N1, just feeling terrible. And then Gordon Brown on the phone. So it was
interesting. Yes.
It wasn't a long call, let's put it that way.
Well, but the petition went through. The apology also was published, so which was good for everyone, especially for the Alan Turing family, obviously. So,
I'll tell you what, I think the big thing is that it then led to other things happen. This thing called the Protection of Freedoms Act, and ultimately a pardon. Yeah. And the thing that was important was there were gay men convicted under those laws still alive with a criminal conviction. And so those eventually got expunged. And I think that is, the bigger thing is Alan Turing is dead. We can't, we can apologize for the behavior, we can't fix it, but to have had an effect on the living that was probably the most gratifying part.
Okay, good. That was a good story. You should put all of those details on the Wikipedia page. That's an interesting story. Good. So let's start with the first topic today. We know I sent a lot of topics. I'm not sure if we're going to cover all of them because we have a time limit. Either way, the first one is an article on CBI Insights that discuss kind of the 7 types of innovation frameworks, from disruptive innovation, product innovation, business model innovation, breakthrough innovation, customer experience, customer behavior innovation, cultural innovation, and my question is, all of them are associated to successful business. Like the disruptive innovation is Netflix versus Blockbuster. The product innovation, it's when the iPod came through and revolutionized the way that we listen to music. Business model innovation, how Salesforce actually changed the way that software is used with software as a service. Breakthrough innovation, when Uber went from 0 to 1, from not having something to having actually a service that is completely new. Then we have the customer experience around Amazon, how Jeff Bezos built the Amazon Prime. Customer behavior, how Slack actually got into the market and changed how we communicate and how we interact with each other. And finally, the last one, the cultural innovation, it's how Pixar actually built an innovation of culture, of creativity at the company. So my question is, and because Cloudflare, it's right now a big company, do you use any kind of frameworks at Cloudflare to actually create this kind of innovation culture, or you just have your own and you take it from there?
Well, first of all, so Christensen, the first one you mentioned there, right, which is around disruptive innovation. Matthew Prince, who is CEO, and Michelle Zatlin are both at Harvard Business School. Christensen was one of the professors they had, and I know that Matthew was very, very close to him in terms of his research. James Allworth, who's the head of innovation at Cloudflare, was also worked with Christensen. He was a researcher for him. So we definitely think of that disruptive innovation as being very, very important. And actually, Cloudflare has an interesting structure, which is that I described my role. What I didn't describe is there's an entire parallel organization. There's a guy called Dane Connect, who's the head of emerging technology and innovation at Cloudflare. And that team looks at things that would essentially might disrupt Cloudflare, or might be things that we wouldn't naturally do as part of the product process. So we actually have designed the organization to have that kind of disruptive stuff going on internally. So that I think is really, really important. Then I think business model perspective, there's an important thing to think about, which is that prior to Cloudflare, fundamentally, if you went to a CDN, you paid for bandwidth, right? You went and you paid more the more you used the service. And everybody loves their mobile phone provider for doing that, right? The more you call people, the more you pay. And in fact, if you look at what happened in mobile phones, is actually everything moved to unlimited, or you're paying a fixed amount per month, because everyone hates, in fact, that I called my mother for 2 hours because I needed to, and now
I'm going to have a huge bill. Yeah,
expense. So we totally said, forget it. The bandwidth cost, we think we can optimize the bandwidth cost to us, and we think we can provide it as a flat fee. And in fact, if you look at Cloudflare, we have a huge number of free customers who are using a large amount of bandwidth, but they're being paid for by the customers who are paying us money are able to pay for the aggregate, because the aggregate is more valuable. And so I think that really fundamentally changed how people think about that. Those businesses are charging for bandwidth, because why do we have such a high gross margin? Because we've optimized our bandwidth costs down and down and down and down over time. So I think that was a big innovation change for the company. The others, you mentioned Bezos and the customer focus. I mean, obviously that's very, very important. I actually think we have some people who work for us from Amazon, who came from Amazon, and the big thing they brought from Amazon is a culture of writing, and not using PowerPoint. And I think that written communication is something that everybody needs to get better at. And here's the pandemic forcing us to do lots more email and stuff like that, and how you communicate in writing is super important. If you've read the Cloudflare blog, we spend a lot of time on communicating stuff, and it's not a marketing thing. I mean, obviously it is marketing in the sense that you're reading about stuff from a company.
It's evangelism in a way, right?
It's evangelism, but it tends to be well written. We spend a lot of effort on that, and I think written communication is actually really important, and people should think hard about how they express things in writing.
That's good. You said about the pandemic and how people should express their ways better in writing. Is that one of the biggest changes that you saw throughout this pandemic, or even actually having remote workers and having everyone outside of the office? It's something that Cloudflare could actually do normally without the pandemic, but it needed to adapt and needed to change. I obviously saw some posts of you on Twitter. Usually when the NHS was clapping in the UK, you saw some graphs of the bandwidth being used.
That's right.
So as a company, did you change a lot because of the pandemic, or is just adapt to this new world?
Well, we have to adapt to it, right? I mean, our entire workforce globally has been sent home and has been home for months. And we were very much a company where people came into the office and met in person. And so we were very much structured around that. And I think that we had a strong social, fabric because of that. We're now getting to a point, because we continued hiring through the pandemic, because the company has not slowed down, we're getting to a point where a very large percentage of people who work at Cloudflare have never been in a Cloudflare office. So you absolutely have to adapt to that. And that means you have to be mindful about the kind of communications you're having. Things that you had randomly, you're not having randomly anymore. So that means a lot more emphasis on one-on-ones or on deliberate communication with people to make sure they're not getting lost. Because it's hard if people aren't having those, everyone meets at the coffee machine, has a random conversation kind of stuff. That's completely lost. The other thing that's really important is, we've sent people home, and for some people that's absolutely fantastic. They love being at home. It's really good. But we also have to recognize that it's not good for everybody. If you're in an apartment with 3 other people who've also been forced to work from home and you just don't have the space, then it can be very stressful. If you're a parent with small children at home who are no longer having schooling, and now it's the summer, they're off, that is very stressful. This work from home experiment that's going on, some people refer to it as, is very, very badly designed experiment, right? Because it's not people who wanted to work from home, it's everybody who was forced to. And also, a lot of people couldn't work from home. So it's great, white collar workers like me, we can go home, but a lot of people can't. And so, when we think about the fact that the internet has supported that, those people who are going home, who are schooling from home, that's absolutely fantastic. But the wider context is very difficult for people. So we've adapted. We've spent time on deliberate communications. I think the written thing has become more important. We already had quite a lot of structure around how decisions were made that didn't necessarily need to be in person. But when I see companies rushing to, we're all going to work from home in the future, I think they're being extremely short-sighted about the sorts of people they can hire and the sorts of communications they need to put in place. That it's not an easy thing to decide that the whole company just works from home.
That's good. So I have one question still about the innovation, because you mentioned the innovation that you do, kind of the frameworks that you use at Cloudflare. But do you use any kind of strategy to create the products that you actually build? Or that they just, you look at the market, you see, well, we could use this, but actually more people will benefit from what we're doing here internally, so we're going to release this as a final product for others to use. How do you develop the whole cycle of products?
Well, there's 2 parts to that, right? So Jen Taylor, who runs our product organization in San Francisco, they have a very professional product management organization, which is working with our customers, looking at the market, looking at what needs to happen to our products to make them valuable to our customers and to the market. So there's an entire product organization doing that. But you've also got very strong product leadership in a wider scale from me, from Matthew, from Dane, from others in the organization, looking at the bigger picture. So some of our stuff will be on the product side from Jen's team working with engineering, but some of it will be, this is a direction we should be going strategically. So if you think about what Cloudflare wants to do is connect as many things and people to our network as possible. So we want to protect, accelerate, and make more available websites, applications, me, IoT devices, you imagine it all. So that sets, you can then use that as a framework for deciding, okay, how do we expand out what we're doing?
Okay, Good. Was it? This is outside of the innovation, but because you changed, you mentioned that you had to change because of the pandemic. Was it a good? Are you still? Do you still think that it was a good idea to have a Lisbon office? Because the way that Portuguese, because you mentioned people around the coffee machine and stuff like that. You know that the Portuguese culture all around coffee, it's very unique and it's very different. Away from London, away from other markets. Do you think that's still it was still a good option?
Well, you're right about the coffee. It's one of the things I noticed when I got here was just how good coffee is. And I ended up buying a really nice bean to cup coffee machine because I was like, oh, the coffee is great. Now I want to have a really nice coffee machine to actually make me espresso. So yes, the coffee thing is really important. Actually, one of the things that we have done as the lockdown eased, as you probably know, the lockdown in Lisbon started easing at the beginning of May. So we're well into, being able to do things. And one of the things we started to do is actually get people together in parks. So if you're not in Lisbon, you'll not know that there are little things called kiosks, which are sort of little coffee shops, and perhaps you can eat there sometimes in parks. So we're actually having meetings in parks over coffee. And I think that's been great. And we're out in the open air and we're not, exposed to each other. But, the Lisbon was a great idea, right? We've tripled in under a year. We're going to continue growing. We hope to be 80 people by the end of this year. Probably the funniest thing about our growth is that initially our office was in the Chiado. We had a room for about 14 people. We moved in February to a location on Avenida de Liberdade, where we had room for as we were growing. And we then had signed on a much larger location on Marques de Pombal. And we actually did move into Marques de Pombal on the 1st of April. Now, we were all in lockdown. So what happened was a moving company took all our stuff from Liberdade up to the top of the road, dropped it off in Pombal. So we have a lovely office, overlooks right down Liberdade, right down to the river. But basically nobody goes there. So yeah, we have an office, and at some point we'll be allowed to go into it. But I think that we're very happy to be in Lisbon. I think that the things we thought were true of Portugal are true. So a welcoming environment for people moving into the country, a good base of software engineers and other technical people here, and also people with language skills, a high standard of living at a low cost that's attractive to people who want to be here. When we were flying, good connectivity out of Lisbon Airport to other parts of the world.
It was.
So,
yes.
So I think those things start to be true. So we're very happy we're here. Obviously, my own journey in Portugal has been very odd, right? Because I moved at the end of August. I had, 4 or 5 months of being able to go out and do all this stuff, and suddenly it's like stay home with my wife. But here we go. That's how these things go.
Well, you're not. You start to become a truly Portuguese when you go for coffee, for espresso, or bica or cafe, whatever you want to call it. And then you actually don't put sugar on the coffee, but actually you eat pastel nata, because you just try to compensate the sugar. So it's a coffee and a pastry.
I love sugar, so I'm fine with the sugar in the espresso and the pastel nata. The only thing is, the pastel is really, really good. And in fact, when we moved here, because we were in the Chiado, we could go and get this really, really amazing pastéis de nata, and I would eat many per day, like 5. And at some point I had a blood test and like, your cholesterol has really shot up, and I was like, oh yeah, I have a pastéis de nata.
Yes,
problem.
That's
so I've had to cut back on.
Yeah, one per day. One per day keeps the doctor away. It's like
I think one per day is right, but I'll only truly be Portuguese if I put both icy sugar and cinnamon on the top. Yeah. And I don't really like cinnamon, so I know that everybody knows I'm a foreigner when they watch me just ignore the cinnamon stuff.
All right, good. Let's move to the next topic, which is an article that I saw from Harvard Business Review, and it talks about kind of the best managers that kind of they try to balance analytical and emotional intelligence. It was kind of a very broad article, but what came to my attention was actually is that people sometimes, especially managers, get stuck in kind of, when we think about stuff, in a task-focused attention versus that we needed to solve problems, versus the one that facilitates reflection, compassion, and social connection. which
Yes.
is kind of we need to have both as managers. So my question to you is, do you think that usually managers kind of tend to one more side rather than the other one? They tend to be more analytical and less emotional, or with your experience in Portugal, we tend to be more emotional and less analytical?
I mean, I think that it's dead easy as a manager to be analytical, right? Because you've got to get some task done. How are you getting on with the task? It's just easy to do that, and it doesn't involve any difficult conversation about emotional things. I think that from Cloudflare's perspective, we had we have these sort of themes of things we think about in the company, and one of them was empathy. And I think empathy is really, really important. You understand others better if you have an empathic response. And so as managers, we think about that as, when we're dealing with other people, is that, we have empathy for their situation. And it's been very important through the pandemic, right? I've had some of my senior directors have their kids come into the room, and you can see that person's feeling bad about that. And I've been like, no, we're living through this very, very difficult situation. If the kid wants to come in and one of them wants to show me a toy dinosaur, I'm like, that's great. This is like, it's fun, it's human, it's a human connection. Software is made by people, they're not robots. And so I think that empathy is really super important. And actually, one of the books that I recommend people read is High Output Management by Andy Grove. And that book talks about one-on-ones and how to structure them, and how important it is to spend time with people, seeing what's going on, both at a like analytical level and at a human level. Because we're people, right? And we're dealing with things all the time.
One of the things, just as a curiosity, one of the things that I saw, I think it was on BBC or Sky. There was I guess they're on one of the shows, and one of the kids just walk in to ask for some sweet, some treat,
Yeah.
and that was the first kind of take. I'm not talking about the one that that has the kid walking in and then the wife,
Yeah.
and then it's a mess on BBC.
Yes. That was comic. That was, in that one there was comic genius.
It
right?
was some comedy.
There was the baby and the walker. Then there was his wife trying to. That was the whole thing. But I know. I mean, in the UK, there's been quite a lot of examples of people speaking on the news and then a child coming to them. But that's reality, right? People have kids.
Exactly. But one of the best solutions I saw, it was one of the guests. It was, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago, and she appeared again on. I'm not sure if it was Sky News on BBC, and she said that she put something on the door so that the kid doesn't walk in. So you have kind of a chair against the door. So if the kid just tries to walk in, everything is locked. I figured out an interesting solution. With my kids, I just I give them, well, it's going to be iPad time. So
Right.
you have internet to have an iPad. Just don't disturb me while I'm doing this. And it's usually an interesting kind of approach. Right. So next topic. Thank you for that. The next topic is just kind of more a general. Get your take about this. It's about facial recognition. We've throughout these lives with other guests, we've been talking about facial recognition, stuff from Hong Kong, from the US, even in the UK, where private companies are allowed to use facial recognition software. We talked about Clearview AI, that they're doing this kind of stuff for the US government. But what kind of struck my attention lately was around a lot of American Civil Liberties Union and some other unions, just roughly 40 different types of groups. They are pushing against a facial recognition ban because with the US government. We've seen IBM, Microsoft, Amazon saying that they're not going to allow their infrastructure to be used to do facial recognition, at least for now, until there's some kind of other laws. What do you think about this, kind of the whole facial recognition, especially because right now we need to wear masks? Well, in certain countries, we need to wear masks. It's going to be tough. Do you think that this is just kind of more the outcome of us using the technology in the bad way, or do you actually need some sort of laws to make sure that no one is doing harmful things with artificial intelligence?
Well, I think there are three
facial
things.
recognition. Sorry. Yes.
Yes. Well, actually, I wanted to talk, more broadly about AI, because I think it's an important part of it, right? It is an example, but I think there's three things. I think there's what you bring up, which is kind of the legal framework under which these things operate. And we've had, like in the UK, if you have CCTV, which is very, very prevalent, Every CCTV is registered with the government. There'll be a sign saying who the operator is, how to get access to it, and all that kind of stuff. So I think there will be inevitably regulation on that. I think there's a larger question around privacy, about your own personal privacy and what you want to do. And then I think there's the larger question about bias in AI. And I think that the regulatory part is in some ways the least interesting because it will get regulated, because this is something people are worried about. And I think we'll see the EU and others worry about it. I think the privacy thing is that something that, Cloudflare has always had a very, very, very strong privacy angle, because we are not a data business where we're selling your data to somebody else. We're not, say a Facebook, which is gathering information and using it to target advertising or something like that. Our customers buy our service. But so I think privacy is something that people care more and more and more about. And actually, I think if you look at Apple's approach, it's really showing how these things should be done, which is, one of the things they're trying to do is put as much of this technology on the device, so it's not even going to the cloud, so it's not even there, for somebody to get access to or to be misused. So I think that's one aspect. But I actually think the most important topic is bias in AI. I mean, there's been loads of instances where the training set gives you complete bias around things. So, the most egregious examples are facial recognition systems that tend to recognize Black individuals as more likely to be criminal than whites. This is the real threat. And this is where, as an industry, this needs to be worked on. And actually, Jeff Barr from Google was talking about this just yesterday about, what do we do about, making sure that the AI itself is unbiased and the teams that work on it are unbiased as well, so that you actually eliminate those sorts of problems. So facial recognition is an example of a larger thing, which is around how do algorithms, and particularly AI things, how are they trained so they are representative of all of humanity and not, the wrong selected group and start making the wrong decisions.
Do you think that this is going to be kind of the holy grail for, let's say, security and police enforcement in the future? Because we've seen this in Hong Kong, and we see how the protests there went through, people actually using lasers towards the cameras, masks, and all sorts of stuff to be avoided through the facial recognition. Do you think that with protests and stuff, more stuff that in the streets, people probably gonna start using different techniques to avoid this, or technology can be even better?
I mean, naturally, right? I mean, if you go back, say 20 years in the UK, when CCTV became more and more popular, what did you see? You saw more people who were criminals wearing hoodies and wearing, coverings for, their head. So it's just a response to the technological innovation. So inevitably, things like that will happen, masks and other things, to avoid facial recognition. I think that when you look at technology, you have to look at it in the larger context of how it is being used and how, policing is done, for example. And I think there are very different ideas around policing in different countries. And so you'll probably end up with a country by country way of thinking about these technologies. But I really think, even in this example, the bias thing is really important, because if your AI is going to recognize, people who are Portuguese as more likely to be, coffee smugglers or something, you've got a problem if they're not.
Exactly.
So I think the underlying platforms is
which
is where
usually we are. I smuggle a lot of coffee from Portugal to London, but that's a different story. But I get your point. You're right. There's a huge, as you said, a huge conversation about how we going to look at AI and we make it more less biased actually towards certain skin colors or certain types of the population. I think it's going to be hard, because on the other side, who's the people that write the algorithm and everything around AI, they're also biased, because it's someone from the other side. It's a person. Everyone has their own beliefs or their own way of doing things. I think it's going to be. We need to do a lot more work there to make sure that that we can use this technology in a safe way, and actually it's gonna protect us in the future. Good.
Part of that comes from having teams that are diverse that work on this stuff, right? So it's not just, I'll naturally have some set of biases which are built into my upbringing from where I came from, and if you have a diverse team, you help to break down those things and actually create a better view of things. So And one of the things to focus on is the algorithms themselves within artificial intelligence systems really aren't the focus. It's the it's the training data that's the important thing, right? So there's lots of different ways of actually doing the actual AI bit, but if you feed it the bad data, you get bad output. It's just the old garbage in, garbage out, just now with an artificial intelligence, layer of sugar on top.
Okay, good. Because I'm conscious about time and we still have some topics, I'm going to skip some of
Go
them.
on.
Let me see if this works properly. I just want to have your view about three topics, fast ones. The first one is about the UK regulators are against Apple and Google on the search deal. So Google has a search deal with Apple. If you go on the iPhone, on the iPad, you search something, it goes directly to Google. It reminds me of the wars of the browsers, Microsoft, and all of that with the EU. Do you think that this has something to so that we should be worried about, or is it just a commercial contract that Google has with Apple and that's it? Do you think that this limits the market to other search engines like DuckDuckGo or any others, or is that relevant in today's age?
Well, I think it's interesting that in iOS 14 in the beta you can actually change the default browser. And so, this is kind of what happened in the Microsoft era, which is you can now actually install something other than Internet Explorer and use that as a default browser. So I think that's probably a move in that direction. I think the real question is are you fighting the right battle? If you say, well, okay, look, everyone's using Google, you should give people choice. Yeah, that sounds great. But let's suppose that even when given choice, everyone uses Google because it produces better results. Then you have an interesting question, which is, okay, the thing you did wasn't effective, in fact, in making the change you wanted, which is why were you worried about this in the first place? Maybe the underlying worry was something to do with Google and advertising or profiling of people and something like that. So I think it would probably be, as much as this might be an interesting thing to do, to give people choice, and people should have a choice of choosing their search engine and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, I think you need to look deeper at the things that you really need to get worried about. I liken this a little bit to the EU cookie law, right? If you're in the EU, every freaking website you go to, you're going to get asked about cookies.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, and if you're like me, I use incognito mode on my phone all the time. That's the default, which means that I click on some link and it's like, hey, we haven't got a cookie from you, so now we're going to ask you whether you consent to having all these cookies stored in there. And I don't think anybody has got time to read those things and figure out what they want to do. And we know that from actual research that a tiny percentage of people are actually going in there and figuring out. What we've done is we've trained a generation of people to click OK on stuff. And we've done that just after having tried to untrain them from doing that, because that's how viruses worked on desktop machines, which is say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you can install your thing. So I think the EU cookie law has created a situation which we've actually created a situation which in some ways is scary, which is people are going to start clicking yes on stuff without thinking about it to get past it. So, we see that it was in some ways it's easy to implement. Everybody implemented it because it was the law, and I think we're going to find out as we go forward whether these things are really effective in making the changes people want.
Okay, good. So for the next two topics, I'm going to change the order here. So probably I'm going to start with the Cloudflare TV because I'm really keen and interested on this. I watched some stuff. I actually was waiting for the premiere. You had to change a couple of days because of the pandemic and all of that. You posted, I think, 2-3 days ago, a blog post on the technical backgrounds about Cloudflare TV. Which was kind of interesting because you explained the story about the need for this and why are you using Zoom and how the whole thing came along. But maybe you can give me a better view of Cloudflare and why do you actually create Cloudflare TV for people to watch and because it has this kind of programs 24/7 every day. Every week, and it's kind of interesting, and it's a lot of content that you put out there.
Well, there's one fundamental reason, which is because of the pandemic, conferences got cancelled, right? And so, how do you get out, news about your company? Normally, you would do that through conference presentations, things like that. And so then you flip around and you say, okay, well, what does everybody do? Everybody does webinars. So you sign up for a specific topic at a specific time, And the marketing teams love that because you get the name and address of the person. You can market to them afterwards or not, depending if you click the right button, right? But if you looked at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an onslaught of webinars, right? Because everyone's like, oh, we better do webinars now because we got to get leads. And we sat back and we said, nobody really wants to do that, like go to those webinar things. What they want is to learn more about your company in more of an organic way. And, TV, like old style TV, was like that, right? And when I was growing up, there were 3 channels in the UK, and you had, that was it. And you went at a certain time and saw something. And we said, we know that within the company, there are a lot of people who have things to say about our products, about how things are done, stories about how we debug something. And if we were to create a webinar of that, that would create a thinking in their minds about production values having to be super high. But we said, if we did something like cable access in the US, right, where anyone can broadcast, then it would be lower friction and you would hear more from our people. So we created this 24-hour, 7 days a week channel. I'll be on in a couple of hours talking to Richard Bolton, who's one of the engineering managers in London. And anyone in the company can go on there. And so it was a way of getting the message out for Cloudflare, very low cost. And you've seen the blog post, how we did it with various open source tools and Zoom. And, it's an experiment. And I know everyone's like, wait, but everyone's doing video on demand and webinars and you're doing a live 24/7 channel. Yeah, we are. And, I do 2 shows a week, one called Threat Watch on a Monday, one called This Week in Net on a Friday, and it's topical, right? It's that week. So at some point we will offer a back catalog where you can go watch things that were in the past. But right now, if you go to cloudflare.tv/schedule, you can see what's live and what's pre-recorded, because obviously we can't actually fill 24/7 with everything, but we fill a lot. And yeah, that's the idea. It's an experiment and we have the capacity to do it. So, hey, why not?
Do you think that being on video, especially for engineers or people that, because one of the slogans that you put when you created the Cloudflare TV is that tune in, geek out. Do you think that the geeks will actually be out and be comfortable in front of the camera and talk about stuff that they're actually doing? Because there's kind of culture that people think, oh, the geeks are not going to actually talk about this because they're too afraid or are afraid of showing up.
I think that if you told them to prepare a presentation for a conference, yeah, they would be very worried about it. There's a certain level of, they've seen other presentations, they've seen great presenters, they've seen great presentations. They start to say, I've got to do a good job of that. If you say, come on John's show and talk about that one time we had that problem, it's just a conversation, right? So you're just having a Zoom call with somebody. It's just like the sort of thing you might do around a coffee and say, hey, remember when that bug happened? Oh yeah. And by making it have that low standard, you actually get better content. Right? Ironically, this is kind of disruption type thing, right? It looks worse, but what turns out, you get better stuff. And so I think that that's helped with the engineers. And there are some engineers who are preparing amazing presentations and doing it live. And there are others who are just saying, yeah, I'll come and talk to you about that particular situation. So, it's an experiment, and yeah, hopefully people watch it.
Good. Actually, we started doing the same things with Tech Talks London. It was exactly the same kind of way because, well, since we're home, why don't we talk to our friends and talk about stuff? We don't have anything prepared. We just talk about the news and that's it. Are you going to create a product out of this, the Cloudflare TV? Do you think about that?
I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, that product to create my own TV channel.
Yeah, we have all of the video streaming. We've talked about how we do it using the Brave thing from BBC for actually bringing, it's basically a virtual studio, so you can bring in essentially different video streams and then decide what you're going to do. Maybe. I don't think that's really the current intention, is to make a product out of it. It's more a question of showing off what our network can do, and also talking about Cloudflare, talking about our products, engineer stories, personal stories about people's careers. There's all sorts of crazy stuff on there. If you go look at the schedule, you'll see, particularly if you look at the live stuff, you'll get a sense for the sorts of variety of things we're doing. Good.
Thank you. For the last topic, and because, let me see if I get this right. No, I don't. There you go. Last topic. I'm just going to pick up the one before Cloudflare, which was Hamilton. It was already launched on Disney channels. Have you saw Hamilton live or on demand on the TV? Any of those? No.
I haven't seen it in a theater or on TV. I know what it is, obviously, but I have not seen it. What was your question? I hope you don't have a question about US history, because I
No,
can't
no,
answer.
no, not at all. Because because you were talking about people are not going to go to events and webinars and
Mm.
this kind of stuff, and the need of Cloudflare TV. And this article that I shared was about Vox and how Hamilton changed the way that we consume musicals and how they align the show with the story, with the music, and now how Disney actually pushed that thing forward for people to see because they can't go to theaters. Do you think that this kind of model of doing a small, because this pandemic is not going to end now, right? It's going to continue for
No.
a few probably more years. So we're going to have less people going to theaters, and probably in a couple months' time, that show or that musical is going to be launched on Netflix, Disney, or
Right.
some other networks. Do you think that's a model that's going to repeat, or are you just going to do that for because of the pandemic?
I mean, I think there's going to be things like that do last, right? I mean, I think if you think about Cloudflare TV, and that may well outlast the pandemic. And I think actually that's a great way of reaching people. And, um, when you think back to when Apple started opening stores, I mean, that was like, are they insane? Everything was going online, right? And then the Apple Store became a destination and helped build the brand. So I suspect that some of these things will experiment with many things to figure out what works, and then some things will be like, oh, actually, that's a great crossover between things. I mean, I think in the movie business, I mean, nobody sold figurines at and suddenly figurines were a thing, right? Like Star Wars things, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm sure these things outlast, the pandemic as it currently is. I you know, Cloudflare isn't going back into a physical office until next year. So, just if we're an indicator, I think most people are going to be at home who can be at home for a long time. So yeah, the internet gets used a lot. And I would say one thing about the internet that's important: the big change for the internet is not the growth and the use of it, because we have the capacity to grow, and the internet stood up to these 40-50% growths in the space of a few weeks. The big change is the symmetry. So most connections are asymmetric. So here I am in Lisbon, I have a gigabit down, I have 200 megabits up. Amazing, right? And in London, I expect you've got something not quite so good, but it will be asymmetric. If you're at home and you're doing video calling and your kids are doing video calling, there's a lot more upload. And so I think a lasting effect will be a drive towards fiber for internet, because ADSL just won't work so well. And I know that we've seen some impact of that in certain networks in Europe. So, at an internet level, I think the internet will get better internet connections out of this, because we finally will accept the internet is vital for what we're doing.
Exactly. Well, in right now I'm in Portugal, but I have fiber. But in London, I'm one of the lucky ones to be actually have fiber from fiber optic.
There you go. So
Otherwise, I think that the connection mostly, and even in London, I live in London, yeah, East London, near the XL. Even there, it's really hard to find a good connection. So
yeah.
it's really hard. John, I know that we are hitting the limit of this chat. It was a pleasure having you here with us on Tech Talks London, episode 50, and we'll see you guys next week. We're gonna take a break after this episode because it's gonna be we're gonna develop new things for the episode 51. John, thank you very much for being here with me, and hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Boa tarde.